Well, let's go ahead and dive into our content for today. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us here, and Happy New Year. Welcome to 2023. Eric, would you like to get us started off with general high-level intro?
Sure. Yeah, welcome to 2023. As Andy mentioned, we're going to be going through some of the 2021 Seattle Energy Code provisions, kind of doing a recap of what's been going on. Rushing is MEP, sustainability, energy, commissioning, lighting design consultant, and we enjoy the code, and so we definitely are focusing on West Coast projects right now, but expanding further across the US as clients want us to, and just excited about the new codes and some of the challenges they bring to us for, really needing integrative design on projects. So, which is what we pride ourselves in, and why we've set up our, 7 studios to be able to respond to these kind of needs for complex projects. So it's exciting times and lots of change in the industry that we're seeing, and we just want to be a resource for folks. So that's why we're having these webinars. So. And these are some of the faces you'll see throughout today. Andy, who is actually doing most of the presenting today?
Key folks that we'll have speaking today will be primarily Eric Vandermeer, Reed Rushing, myself, Andy Burnham. Hopefully Nathan Miller will be joining us, and you'll hear from Nick Rich as well. So, but this is a bit of our kind of high-level studio leadership team, and we're looking forward to sharing some more info with you today. So, we've already given a little preview to folks who showed up on timer early, but we're going to do a quick little just make sure that folks are here, can hear us. Please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat, and we've got a trivia question for everyone today. Our trivia for today is, what was our first code cycle that included provisions for dedicated outdoor air systems, or DOAS? So we've got a couple folks that have already started putting some guesses into the chat, but do feel free to use that chat box to respond to the trivia question, as well as introduce yourself. And as we go through the session today, please don't hesitate to drop questions into that chat box, or also feel free to use the raise hand function in Teams. And if there's kind of a good pause point, we'll stop and address those questions, or otherwise we'll come back and sort through questions in the chat at the end of the session for a Q&A portion. So we've got some trivia guesses coming in, and we'll come back to that in just a few minutes after folks finish putting in their guesses. So here is just a quick high-level agenda of what we're going to cover today. We're mostly going to be having a bit of a recap session, talking about what happened in the last few rounds of public meetings since the last session that Rushing shared with everyone. We're also going to do a little bit of both a cover content as well as cover the recap for the meeting that occurred this week on C406 and C407. And we're also going to touch a little bit on some proposed changes for substantial alterations and equipment replacements. All right, Eric, I'm going to hand it back to you to start us out with just first a little high-level context on the codes, what's driving Seattle's amendments to the state code provisions for 2021, and overall just general process. How does the code development process work in City of Seattle before we get into the technical details?
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, so there are several resolutions that Seattle has passed over the years. Here's a recap of some of the major ones. So the base energy code goal has always been, or since 2001, has been to create an energy code that's 20% more efficient than ASHRAE 90.1. There are really no checks and balances in that resolution for, cost or other things. But so the goal on the books for Seattle is to create a code that's 20% better. And for this code cycle, that would be 90.1 2019. So, yes. And then they also have goals towards greenhouse gas emission reductions, which target both new and existing buildings. The Green New Deal that was passed a few years ago uh, for no fossil fuels in buildings, and then the much newer Seattle Building Performance Standard, which is focusing on, again, carbon emissions reduction uh, for both new and existing buildings throughout the city. So pretty lofty goals in Seattle that we have. And so, as always, Dwayne Johnlin is, kind of captaining this for SDCI, and looking for all the great ideas to help meet these resolutions that have been passed. So it's a much more informal process than what happens in the state process. Um, and a lot of the good ideas that get into Seattle, end up in the next version of the state energy code. So we're continually trying to chip away at the goals and design and build projects and operate buildings to meet those goals. So Andy, did you want to jump in on this one? So
Um,
or you want me to keep going?
no, let's just keep going. Do you want me to go back to the
No, I'm just
timeline
saying,
slide or?
the time,
Okay.
the timeline, we're still targeting an effective date of July 1st, 2023 for the code. I know Dwayne's trying to get through all the good ideas that he can get implemented in January of this year. And then the process is, going to CCAB, which is just an advisory board, and then going to the mayor's office and forward. So if you have any, editorial corrections or ideas, feel free to email those to Dwayne and copy Rushing. We love to be involved in fixing the code and making it better. So.
So I'll take this slide really quickly. Part of why Rushing is setting up these presentations is just to make sure that folks are informed and understand the process and opportunities for comment and idea sharing. We've already gone through, SDC has already gone through 4 public meetings, the most recent being this past Monday. There is one more meeting for sure with a tentative additional meeting slot for kind of as required additional discussion. These meetings are typically Mondays, although next week's is going to be Tuesday, 10:30 to 12:30. You are able to go in person at City Hall. There's a nice conference room there. There's also a WebEx meeting option, so you are able to participate virtually. And again, here is we've got Dwayne's contact information included, and as Eric mentioned, he's always looking for ideas, feedback, technical corrections, anything to make the code more enforceable, um, clear, any of those sorts of things, as well as content ideas. Just also a quick recap on Rushing has previously done 2 of these public presentations. We've got links to the previous recordings. We will be posting the slide deck after today, as well as a recording of this session, so that'll become available later this week. And with that, let's go ahead and jump on over into our public meeting recaps. So we'll start out talking a little bit about, it's hard to even remember that this was almost a month ago, but the 12/12 public session was focused on lighting, electrical, and renewable energy changes. We've already covered a lot of the more technical details in our last session, so do go check out that recording and slide deck if you want to see more of the details of specific proposals. Today, we're just going to focus on kind of recap of significant discussion, changes, kind of other refinements that have happened since that last session. Lighting was not particularly contentious. There was a good bit of discussion about LPD targets, et cetera, but there weren't any high level extensive changes as a result of that public meeting. Kind of the biggest impact items that were in that proposal package were expanding dimming control requirements, as well as just generally cranking down LPDs 5-ish%. It's not just a straight 5%. You'll have to go check out end use by space category by space category, but in general, cranking down stringency on those factors a bit. I'm going to pass it off to Nick Rich to tell us a little bit about what's happened with the electrical proposals.
Thanks, Andy. Uh, so I'm Nick Rich. I lead our electrical studio here. So there's a couple of things that I think a number of you have been keeping your eye on or with interest. One is with the renewable entry. It's energy, excuse me. It's revisions really in a matter of scale, whereas the electrical readiness for commercial kitchens is more, I guess, in terms of service size, it's a matter of scale, but it's introducing something new. Both of them are basically looking forward in terms of energy. So with the renewable energy, the requirement is ratcheting this up from 0.5 watts per square foot of the gross conditioned area to 0.75, so a 50% increase. And I know, Andy, you've been tracking the solar fund that continues to be available as an exception. I think at our last meeting, that was a little bit up in the air.
Yeah, that was one of the things that was clarified in the public meeting, is that solar fund that was created for the 2018 Seattle Energy Code, and became available about a year ago. That's going to continue to be available as a offset option. So that's you pay $250 a watt based on some calculations that are in that section C411. That solar fund kind of donation path or affordable housing, installing your PV panels on an affordable housing project, those two compliance pathways will continue to be available.
And then getting back to the electrical readiness for commercial kitchens, the focus in Seattle recently has been on energy use in buildings, but not really focused on one facet that is more operational. And the new requirement is shaping up to be setting us up so that we need to create service capacity as well as distribution for future electrical equivalent, basically electrical equivalent to the gas MBH capacity for cooking, even if today it's a gas-fired cooking in a commercial kitchen, that still will be allowed, but we need to have the service capacity and a panel that's either in the kitchen or a nearby adjacent space. And then finally, electrically, one more item that's a little bit of an expansion for energy monitoring, and that is additional for parking facilities, sub-metering of the spaces for the lighting and the ventilation.
And one clarification in this past week's public meeting was that is garage space only. It's not spaces within the garage. So if you've got an elevator machine room with a fan coil and a split system, it's not talking about that split system. It's just the larger equipment serving the garage itself.
That serves it,
Um,
yeah.
and I will say that the electric readiness provisions for gas appliances for commercial kitchens, that was one of the more hotly discussed items during the public meeting. A lot of feedback about well, what does adjacent mean in terms of location of that panel? And a lot of folks trying to think through um, actual outcomes for projects. So if anyone does have any feedback to the extent of how that may shake out for projects that you work on, or concerns based on past project experience, those would all be helpful data points in making this be the best, most enforceable uh, code provision going into effect. So that was one in particular that I think if folks do have feedback, it would be especially welcomed. All right. I haven't seen anyone use the raise hand function. I've not been keeping an eye on the chat, so I'll just do a really quick check. I'm not seeing any questions, so we're going to go ahead and just keep moving along. But again, do feel free to use that raise hand or post questions in the chat, and we'll either address those or come back to them at the end for Q&A. So with that, we're going to talk next about the December 19th mechanical public meeting. Um, again, full details are available in our past presentation recording and slide deck. So if you want to know more details of proposal language or specifics, do go check out the recording or slide deck. We're mostly just going to talk a little bit about recap and just highest level items. So I'm going to pass that off to Reed. Are you going to take this one?
Yeah, I'll touch on this one. So, like the lighting discussion, there weren't many significant changes during the public meeting on mechanical systems. We did have some clarifications on the fan power limitations and calculations that have been added to the code. One specifically, it was ERV fan efficacy for smaller ERVs. So typically on a unit by unit basis. The high fan efficacy of 1.7 CFM per watts is one criteria to meet the code, and then an alternate pathway for that. That what was clarified was the intent is you either provide that fan efficacy or you provide an ECM motor in that ERV, and either way would be able to meet the code. And so that does provide more flexibility in our ERV selections that are out there. Um, a lot of budget ERVs that are going in right now don't have ECM motors, but so there is incremental cost increase from that requirement. But we still have a lot of options that are out there that fit within, current footprints of ERVs. So we're not talking about lower ceilings or anything like that. So that was a helpful clarification. And then Eric, do you want to touch on the occupied standby controls?
Sure, yeah. So there's quite an extensive rewrite that happened of the occupied standby controls. This provision is coming out of the 2024 IECC and the ASHRAE 90.1 2019, I believe. And since we have a code that's written around DOAS, there was some reworking of the code language for how to do that. And so definitely this affects office buildings and how the tenant improvements are going to be done. The control zones are essentially set up by floor and or by a maximum of 25,000 square feet. So if you had, for example, a 50,000 square foot floor plate, you would have two zones, and essentially as each one of those zones become unoccupied, you're going to be setting back the space temperature set points. And as all the zones within either that floor or that 25,000 square foot space uh, become unoccupied, then you'd be required to shut off the ventilation systems to that, which would be both the outdoor air supply and the associated toilet exhaust. So yeah, it's a pretty uh, it's a good proposal for energy savings, but it's going to add some complexity in using occupancy sensors to set back and to reduce ventilation values. So definitely take a look at that rewrite if you haven't seen that version of the code. So
All right, thanks, Reed and Eric. All right. Still not seeing any hands up, and let's just do a quick check on the chat. All right, we've got one question here from Brian Skinner. Seems like having the service capacity to replace gas ranges may be a significant increase in power service size to a building. How is SEL preparing to deal with these changes? Nick,
That's
do you
a
have any comments that you'd want to add to that one?
Well, it's a good question and a poignant one too, because we're actually somewhat dealing with that on some projects now where we're looking at general electrification from a standpoint of a project that has residential. I think, as many of you know, we already have to have capacity and an outlet for or not a commercial, a residential range. This is extending this into the commercial sector. And if we're looking at a building, say in the downtown core in the network, we're already required per city light standards to go one size up on our transformer sizing. And so City Light actually, in our conversations with them, has already been looking ahead to electrification requirements in general. Some of that is also, there's several factors at play, like increased EV charging requirements, and this is just one more facet of that. It does constitute impacts on the electrical service side. So the equipment that we design and building owners have to account for in initial costs, it does uh, increase that size.
All right, thanks, Nick. Uh, Brian Slick, I see you've got your hand up.
I do. Thanks. Easier to just say it than type it. So one issue that just came up on a project recently is I think it's only Seattle maybe that requires they got rid of the exception on centralized systems for ERVs in terms of requiring individual control, which sort of forces you to the unitized ERV the way I understand it. We've got some clients that are not liking ERVs in every unit and really interested in exploring at least either centralized or semi-centralized ERVs. And so does the new code provide some pathway on the control side where you could get away from having an ERV in every unit? That's my question.
Yeah, so this is a mechanical code requirement, and Eric, it was an unintentional omission that the
I think
central.
the omission was at the state code, the published pages, the insert pages for the state code does not list the exception that allows the removal of unit by unit control. I think that's in the 28. I think that exception is in the 2018 Seattle.
I was just looking and it's not. I think it's under 403.5.5, and that it's in the way I understand it. I was working with Emerald City, but Grant and I Middleton were having a discussion. It's in the state code that we found it in the state code, but not in the city of Seattle code. So that exception to 5.5.2 is missing out of the Seattle code. So if it's an error, is it going to come back in? At least we were just looking at it yesterday. Is it going to come back in the new code so that you can consider other than unitized?
I'll have to go back and I'm trying to get there in the Seattle code. Let's see, 403.
5.5, I think. I'm working off memory and I'm just smart enough on this to be dangerous.
It's
Hey, Brian, would you mind
403.45.
posting that section reference in the chat? And then I'm going to recommend that we parking lot this. Eric can do a little research on the side while we move forward. And then let's come back to this at the end of the session during the Q&A. Does that work for everyone? And Brian, sounds like you might have a code proposal on your hand to suggest to Dwayne.
Well, there's clients have interest in, at least if they don't want to go into every unit, be changing filters in every unit on these ERVs. And, if they're sitting out in the living room, big access panel, it's a question.
Yep.
I'm getting.
All right. Well, let's parking lot that for the end of the session for the Q&A portion, and we're gonna keep moving forward with we've still got some content to cover for C406 and C407 changes. And what great timing. I just saw Nathan Miller pop into the chat. So this is great. I don't have to talk about C406 and he can cover that for us.
Yeah, no problem. Hi, everybody. Highest level summary about C406, which is the energy efficiency package or menu choices, if you will. The biggest change that Seattle made is just that they're requiring you to get more of those points than the state. So it's basically a 10% bump for any building type, which is what that chart sort of shows in the bottom right there, that you just have to get more of these points. Seattle did not introduce any different credits, did not change how much the credits are worth. But you just have to accumulate some more. But the state code, of course, did make a large change in C406 credits in that there's more options than there were previously. And now C406 has been split into two parts. There's C406.2, which is you have to get enough of these energy efficiency credits. And there's C406.3, which is the newest kid on the block. You have to get some load management credits, and it's a separate calculation. You got to pick up points in both areas.
And one quick clarification there, the new load management requirements are just for new construction. So C406 energy efficiency packages are new construction additions, Chapter 5, changes in occupancy, et cetera. Load management is just if you're doing a new building. All right. Nate, do you want me to jump to the next slide here?
Yeah, let's go ahead. So this is a clip of the new C406.2 chart, which is all your choices of how you can pick up points again for the energy efficiency side of that calculation. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but what I wanted to show here with the color highlighting is just sort of in what general areas of MEP and architectural design are the credits available. And you can see a lot of them are in that purple area for service hot water, at least on the residential type projects. A good number for HVAC efficiency, only one for renewable energy. And then there's also down at the bottom of a little bit more ability to pick up some points with kind of areas that weren't really regulated by energy code previously. So some appliances and elevators. They were governed by the code, but now there's some opportunity to demonstrate that you're doing better than standard practice and pick up energy points for that. Then so that was the energy efficiency side of C406. Here's the load management side, the new credits essentially. The concepts here should be familiar for people who've looked at sort of passive designs. Like for example, that very last line item, building thermal mass, is encouraging you to expose thermal mass in the design in a way that allows you to shift when peak, say cooling loads occur. And that's what all these load management credits are about, is trying to shift or at least have the capabilities of shifting when peak demands happen so that we can do this in a coordinated way and help keep the grid demand lower. So for example, the HVAC load management credits get into the concept of, can you have automated, thermostats that'll maybe bump up that cooling set point a couple degrees so that we can avoid having a crisis in our hands like what you see in California, where everybody's trying to cool at the same time, and then you get rolling brownouts. This is what we're trying to head off with this new type of load management credits. Is let's smartly manage when our buildings are drawing demand, not just how efficient they are on an annual basis, but when are they drawing energy. And I won't go into detail into each of these, but there are some fascinating credits now available in this load management section.
And I think a couple other just to briefly mention, there is one, for example, for electric battery storage. So just a more straightforward, put in a battery storage system in a way that you're able to deploy and control what you're pulling from the grid. Another example being like increased storage volume capacities for surface water in buildings that have large loads, such as multifamily. So there's kind of an interesting spread of credits and a lot of opportunities to integrate that to resiliency planning for your facilities as well. Nate, anything else you want to say on C406 before we jump over to C407?
Just that we've done some analysis of some sort of prototype buildings. Our initial findings would be that for a Seattle high-rise or mid-rise resi project, it doesn't feel like it's going to be too difficult to pick up the necessary C406.2 or C406.3 credits. We kind of think there are some pretty reasonable pathways there. It gets a lot more challenging for, say, a core and shell office building. There are just very limited points available, and the points that are available are not necessarily easy to implement. So that's the kind of decision point where it might trigger you to say, hey, office building, especially core and shell, much more likely to go C407, which Andy's about to get into, rather than sit in the prescriptive world and have to pick up the C406 points.
All right, thanks, Nate. Okay, so now we'll talk a little bit about changes for C407. C407 is our energy modeling pathway in code. You'll also hear it called total building performance, or TBP. It's essentially where you're doing an hourly energy model, estimating all of the interaction of your envelope, your lighting, your mechanical, and are allowed to trade off within that energy model to a certain extent different efficiencies and credits, as long as you're hitting the mandatory criteria, but you don't have to go through and check every single prescriptive box in the code. You've got a bit more flexibility in how you trade off to get the net energy performance. And when I say energy performance, I also mean carbon performance. That's something that changed in our last code cycle, 2018. So we've shifted to a carbon emissions metric in lieu of energy. The other really big thing that was new in 2018 is there is a limit on the amount of trading that you can do in that energy model between the performance of your envelope and your mechanical systems, water heating, lighting, other aspects of the design. So in the 2018 code cycle, that was essentially a 10% allowance on top of whatever you can do prescriptively. That has not changed for the 2021 code cycle based on the envelope proposals. There was a bit of a big new proposal of 20% of all vertical fenestration must be high performance. And that was clarified during this past week's public meeting and batch of proposals. C407 will not allow you to trade off that new 20% high performance glazing requirement. That's a mandatory measure. That's not a prescriptive measure. So still some pretty extensive limits on how much we can trade between an energy model and the envelope performance of the buildings. But a little bit of good news there in terms of the glazing ratios are also getting modified in that envelope packages. So a lot of some building types are anticipated to increase from a 35% glazing ratio allowance to potentially 40% for high-rise projects, for example, multifamily and office. It's a little bit of a mixed bag on the envelope pieces, but again, those are things that are not permitted to trade off within the C407, except for that 10% allowance on the UA heat loss calculation that the models have to do. So biggest changes here, similar to what Nathan just shared on the C406 credits, the state code introduced a new requirement for the C407 pathway as well, where it used to be a single building performance factor metric that we needed to comply with, again, using those carbon emission factor metrics. We've added a second requirement for energy modeling as well. And this is set up in a way to address not only the regulated energy, which is what the building performance factor was, it was a multiplier on the regulated portion of your consumption. And we've added a second metric that's based on total site consumption. And it's essentially just an overall kind of cranking down towards net site reductions. And for some projects, there's a chance that those might start to, not have ability to get there with just on-site efficiency. There is a pathway to look at off-site and renewable energy credits. So that's something else that's new too, is pathways for RECs or off-site photovoltaic or other renewable energy. We do want to take some time to open the floor for any questions, thoughts, before we open the floor. Brian, Eric, looks like you came to a resolution there. Do you want to just give us a quick summary of what you concluded on the ERV controls item?
Yeah, so I did notify SDCI of that missing text in 2021, and they were going to issue an errata. It doesn't look like it ever has been issued. So that they have acknowledged, definitely, Brian, that that is an editorial omission. And so I'm assuming, either talking to the reviewer or issuing a code alternate says we're following the state code, would suffice. But yeah, definitely follow up with the project specific
Yep.
request there.
I did some copy paste with that what you guys posted, so we're well set up for those projects. Thank you.
Great. Always nice when there's a happy ending there.
Yeah, though I guess the reason that, and there's two reasons we're seeing this. I think there's the gut is it's going to be more expensive, at least initially, for either semi-centralized, say, pairs of units versus completely centralized. But with the heat pump space conditioning coming on, that's adding another potential burden on the facade, particularly if you're doing like the Apoca unit modular, trying to get through the skin. And that coupled with trying to keep maintenance somewhat rational, that's where the owners are saying, I know it might be more expensive, but I want to look at it and understand doing some sort of shaft ducted ERV on the roof. So for those other contractors or mechanicals on the call, that's what we're looking at in pre-con kind of going forward. And when there are a number of projects that are actually doing that rather than the ceiling mounted in the units.
Yeah, lots of options out there. And I guess I will mention, Brian, with the 2021 code, we recently at the state level found some of the rules for the combined inlet outlets were removed as part of the state process there. There was some model code changes to address that at the IMC level. So we're still discussing with SDCI what they may allow for distances between combined inlet outlet fittings for the individual EREPs. There are also
that'll be a huge hit if that combined outlet goes away. I mean, it's just a
well,
struggle.
you can still have the combined outlet. It's just what the code is now silent on is the distance between the combined outlet and other environmental exhaust outlets and a second adjacent unit combined outlet. So that's the part we're trying to get clarified a little bit further. So we'll see what we end up with in Seattle. There are some other pretty substantial changes in the mechanical code to address refrigerant piping routing for A2L refrigerants, are slightly flammable refrigerants that we'll be using soon in VRF and other systems. So if you haven't reviewed those mechanical code changes, requirements for dedicated shafts to run your refrigerant piping in, and shafts that are ventilated to the outdoors. So those are some new provisions that are in the model code and the model IMC code to address A2L refrigerants. So we've been recently reviewing those requirements with City of Seattle. What else, Reed, can you think of that's come up recently in the mechanical code review?
Well, the base code language had some clarification on piping location, right? So the former Seattle rule of no refrigerant piping joints in corridor ceilings unless it's in a rated enclosure, that's going away. You're allowed to have refrigerant piping joints in corridor as long as they're not exposed. So that was an interesting change at the model code level. And then lots of, I guess, range hood updates, Eric.
Yeah, the range hood updates, I think we may have hit on this, but yeah, there are now different ventilation rates for, natural gas for in-unit, in-dwelling unit, residential dwelling unit ranges for different ventilation exhaust rates for natural gas versus electric appliances that happened at the state level, as well as additional testing requirements that happen to make sure that you're achieving those airflows, which was partially clarified under the 2018 code. Now it's been further clarified as to how you have to test and report. So the mechanical drawings now need to list, what the makeup air path is. If it's an operable window that's open, then you're allowed to test with an open operable window. As long as you're not at a high CFM and require makeup air per the code. Lots of discussion at the state load about health and wellness in residential units related to cooking. Most of this is coming out of California. There's new testing requirements for residential rain hoods that there's an approved list that the hoods have to be part of.
But are you, sorry, did you shift into talking about single family? Because I thought we're not using windows for ventilation makeup air anymore under the commercial code. It's all
But
ERVs
the 2018 commercial code and the 2021 do not allow you to use operable windows for your whole house ventilation. It's still allowed to do makeup air for clothes dryers and makeup air for local exhaust fans in a bathroom that's not part of the whole house system, and still allowed for domestic range exhaust. So we still have we're not building residential as a lab where when you turn on your range hood, you have some makeup air system in each unit, right? Even though we have super tight construction, as we know, Brian. So we're still allowed to say on our drawings, when you're running your range hood, we recommend that you open your operable window to get design airflows. So.
Okay.
So yes, whole house exhaust has a set of criteria, and then what's called local exhaust in the mechanical code has a separate criteria.
So I don't want to monopolize, and perhaps we could set up a sidebar here, but are we saying that the balanced ventilation system with ERVs either needs to account in calculations for making up for the range hood, or
No, we're not saying that. We're saying your whole house ventilation system has to be balanced. So that's a system that you're putting in that's running 24/7 to provide balanced ventilation. And then your local exhaust, when you go cook at your stove and you flip the switch, we're still allowed to flip that switch and turn on the range hood exhaust. And we're allowed to drag that air from anywhere. It can come under the corridor door, it can come through cracks in the building. But you have to state on the mechanical drawings what the basis is, right? So if it says, I want to do a high rise and I don't want to do any operable windows, you have to be able to achieve that. You have to show that you can achieve that design CFM without opening an operable window, right? If anyways, we're going deep in the weeds here,
well,
Brian, but
but
there was a
yeah,
lot of
there's
discussion
a
about this at the
there's a
state.
huge nuance in buyout, right? Like,
Yeah.
am I buying windows with trickle vents? And I don't know that the community, if it's gonna, well, enough said. There's a bunch of people in this call, but
So essentially you got to test under the provisions. So if the mechanical drawings say operable window can be open, then you can test with your operable window open, right?
okay, it's really about testing is what you're saying.
Yep.
That's what it's really about. Okay.
And about the hood standard. So there's new listed hoods, and there's also acoustical rating requirements for the hoods. So there's a bunch of standards for the range hood exhausts that are all coming out of California. There's also a new capture efficiency test standard. So you can either hit the airflow or hit the capture efficiency. Anyways.
I'm gonna reach out to you to have a dedicated training session for us at some point on maybe on this issue alone. Thanks.
Yeah, that sounds like a nice, nice. I am gonna really quickly just put our slide content back up for a second to share just a quick recap on, again, that meeting for alterations in existing buildings is gonna be next Monday. So stay tuned for more info there. And potential for, I'm sorry, next Tuesday, it's on the 17th. Apologies, Tuesday, 10:30. Potential for one more session on the 23rd, depending on how discussion goes, further discussion needed. So hold that time in your calendar for a potential final meeting. And then just a quick reminder, here's our past sessions that we've presented. We will have this and we'll add a link to today's recording when we send the slides out. So with that, I think that's all we have today. I haven't seen any other hands go up or questions, so I just want to pause for one more moment. Any last items before we wrap up for the day? Going. 1, 2, 3, gone. Everyone can have 5 minutes back. So,
Nope, we
uh,
got one. We got
oh,
Steve
we got
Larson with
one.
his hand
Steve
raised.
Larson. Go ahead.
I was just wondering what the answer to the trivia question was.
Oh.
Oh my goodness, you are so correct. Eric, would you like to address that for us?
It's the 2015 Washington State Energy Code was when DOAS was adopted. That was a fun time in my life. I can tell stories about that if you'd like to know, but yeah, it was a very interesting code proposal by Ecotope and others, and it was very surprising that that it was passed, frankly, and on the first try at the state level. It's something that didn't go into the Seattle code first and went through at the state level, and has really changed how we do HVAC, right? We're starting to talk about HAC plus V systems, right? And trying to get rid of the old acronym HVAC. So be a long time to do that, but we'll see. We're trying. But yeah, very interesting time in my life, at least.
And Steve, thank you for the reminder. I can't believe we almost left without the trivia. All right. Thanks all. You can have 3 minutes back. Enjoy the rest of your afternoons. Thanks all.